Just days into doomsday, I had done the unthinkable. I had just taken my first life. Seeing firsthand what happens to human nature and society when everything goes to hell is shell-shocking and startling. Pulling the trigger of a firearm to put down an imminent threat to protect you or your loved ones is a traumatic experience. Prolonged exposure to an active post-societal apocalyptic environment is a world no one wants. You can plan and develop all you want with your preps, but nothing can prepare you for the gruesome, ferocious atrocities of horror you'll encounter on a daily basis. You can be naive and think everyone will still remain fairly well behaved and keep observing rules of a polite society, but truth is that will only result in your eventual demise. I can't stress this enough, but in the event of Armageddon, an awful lot of people won't make it simply because they are unable to think outside their comfort zones of the rules of a civilized society. A large percentage of the population will suddenly find themselves without the protection of law enforcement and will no longer be at the top of the food chain. There will be many people out there, like the two thugs today, who will prey upon the weak without remorse or fear of repercussions for what they feel they need to take, steal, and acquire by any means necessary to survive. Michael had heard the deadly confrontation play out and raced down the hallway to immediately clear the stairwell corridor. He entered and instantly drew his service weapon on me as the marauder's blood dripped off my face. Ears still ringing intensely from 2 discharging rounds at such close range, I couldn't hear him ordering me to drop my pistol. Jim jumped in between us, stopping the deputy from firing center mass on my body and ultimately ending my existence. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Jim shouted. "Don't shoot. He's with me," he said. With a confused and stunned look on my eyes, Jim took out a handkerchief and began removing the remnants and blood of the deceased thug off my gore-covered face. He was fortunate to not have been struck, as he had hightailed it out of harm's way seconds before I engaged the threat. Miraculously, we were both unscathed from the near-death involvement. Seconds felt like hours, and I'd still not muttered a word and answered Jim's question if I was okay. The persistent ringing and buzzing of tinnitus was ravaging my head. It was loud and overbearing, and all I could focus on. Jim informed Michael of who I was and the fate of the other bandit. 75 minutes after entering the building, both threats had been eliminated. Still sitting on the cold, blood-covered concrete ground, Michael extended his hand, helping me to my feet, jokingly saying, "You do have a permit to carry that weapon, don't you?" Truthfully, it didn't matter what he said. I couldn't make out a word of it anyway. Was this going to be a permanent condition, I thought to myself? Am I going deaf, I wondered? Now standing on my 2 feet, albeit unbalanced and rickety, Jim placed both his hands on my face, looking studiously in my eyes, saying, "You good, neighbor?" Reading his lips, I answered, "I'm good, Jimmy." "I sure could use a drink right now," I said. "Priority number 1 is getting the departed corpses out of here," Michael exclaimed. "The last thing we need is for one of the residents to stumble across the carnage, creating more panic." Jim asked, "Where do you suggest putting them?" "The dumpster," I answered. "That's where trash goes. We can't bury them, and it's not worth wasting irreplaceable gasoline to burn them. Grab a couple wheelchairs, Jim, and we'll load them up and take them out." Less than 100 hours into Judgment Day, we were already reduced to disposing of dead bodies into dumpsters. We had no emotional attachment to these 2 vile individuals, but what if it was a loved one? I couldn't fathom the thought of tossing them into a dirty, dark, dingy, smelly dumpster and leaving them to rot and decompose. If these trials and tribulations were transpiring already in our small town of 30,000, just imagine the scene of carnage and horror developing in a mega metropolitan area with a population exceeding 8 million like New York City. The 3 of us exited the temperature-controlled senior center, wheeling out the 2 corpses as the weather conditions continued to deteriorate outside. The accumulating collection of early-season snowfall had dumped another 3+ inches since we'd been inside, making it impractical to continue pushing the wheelchairs through it. I motioned over to Brian, still hunkered down inside his truck in the parking lot, to cruise over. It took the four of us to lift the mountain of a man Norman had terminated and put in the bed of Brian's truck. Just yesterday, we were loading that same bed with precious and valuable supplies from the store. 27 hours later, and we were now dumping slain bodies into it to transport for disposal. The reality of living and navigating through a dark, dangerous, and violent world that encompasses us now. With both Marauders loaded up, Jim directed Brian to the dumpster at the back of the building. The snow-covered Ford F-150 pulled up, and Michael, Jim, and I deposited both bodies into their final resting place, a green 8-yard dumpster that in normal times held garbage bags of trash. But we were no longer living in normal times. The current environment resembled more closely the end of times. Our attention now turned to what to do with the 100-plus seniors in the Independent Living Center. With only days left before the generators would run dry, and the constant threat of would-be rovers ransacking and ravaging the residents, it was quite the predicament. Michael had already decided he was going to stay and take up residence at the location with his mother. He asked Jim, what if we acquired more fuel to keep the backup power running longer? Jim responded, you're going to need a whole hell of a lot of fuel to do that. How much, Michael asked. Running on 50% load only, it consumes roughly 13 gallons an hour. 100% full load, you're looking at 25 gallons of diesel an hour, Jim stated. Then I suggest we throttle back the output and try to obtain some additional diesel reserves, Michael suggested. The Burn and Dairy directly across the street must have a few thousand gallons of diesel stored in the underground steel storage tank, I said. Jim interjected, you can't siphon gas from a tank below ground level, but you can suck it up with some kind of vacuum pump very easily if the level of gasoline in the tank is no more than 15 to 20 feet below ground level. There are two serious problems to be solved. One, we're going to have to break the locks in the tanks unless we find the keys. And the other problem is that the filler pipes in newer installations might have sturdy screen traps put there to protect anything accidentally getting into the tank when the cap is open that will allow gasoline to pass, but not a hose. There will not be a vacuum problem in the tank because the filler pipe is open. How do you know all this, Michael asked Jim. Me and some friends pulled this trick back in our young and reckless days. Back then, the tank was apt to be secured with a cheap padlock, and if you used a wrench or two, you could just pull the pin or bolt in the hinge. There were plenty of country stores with gas pumps back in those days in places with hardly anybody around at night. A suction hose and a suction pump with the pump wired to the car battery and the output end feeding into the car's gasoline tank. Us good old boys stole a good bit of gas from the nearest such lonely country store until the owner caught on figuring out somebody was stealing gasoline. And it wasn't him, and it wasn't his wife who ran the cash register. So being as this was the redneck country backwoods, he hid in the store with his shotgun. People in such places were accustomed to stomping their own snakes, and seldom called the sheriff for anything minor. I'll leave it to you to figure out how a couple of us good old boys had to explain to our parents why our cars were covered up with tiny little dents and paint chips from being hit with a few hundred shotgun pellets, Jim jokingly said. He was a good Christian man, and he didn't want to actually hurt us, and he didn't want to embarrass our parents by having us arrested either. Brian's got a power inverter in his truck. We've got multiple pond pumps put away for winter in storage along with tubing. I'll grab those along with a couple of 15-gallon plastic drums we can fill, as well as any other smaller gas cans we have laying around, Jim stated. In the meantime, the three of us will do wellness checks on the residents, ensuring everyone is safe and sound, I told Jim. We'll split up and each take a floor. Michael, you grab the third floor where your mother is located. The ringing in my ears was finally starting to subside, helping me regain my equilibrium I so desperately needed in these dangerous and perilous times. In between apartment checks, I radioed Jody, letting her know her boyfriend and Brian were safe, as I conveniently left out the details of the deadly firefight. No need to make her nervous and uncomfortable, as she was sheltered back home all by herself. The less chatter over the air, the better. You never know who could be possibly eavesdropping and gaining intel and an advantage on your group. We were extremely lucky and fortunate none of the seniors had been injured or killed during the raid. Jim decided to create a log and a list of everyone who was residing in the residence. It included which rooms were vacant and which apartments were occupied. An easier way for us to take attendance and roll call in the coming days. The three of us took the supplies Jim had gathered out to Brian's truck as we waited for Michael to return from clearing the third floor and visiting with his mother. The Burn and Dairy gas station sat directly across the street to the east. It was hidden and concealed out of sight as the intense flurries and flakes continued falling. It was impossible to gauge the atmosphere from here, so I decided to walk the short distance and let the group know the ambience once I was on location. The last thing I wanted was to drive up into a murderous melee and risk having our only set of 4x4 wheels be pummeled with bullets as we'd be sitting ducks inside. I carefully walked up the berm that had a row of tall pines growing on top of it. The snowpack was halfway up to my knees. What was once a busy, bustling intersection now had zero traffic in all directions. The ice cleats on my feet were the only thing that stopped me from slipping and sliding down the other side into the drainage ditch next to the road. Snow now waist deep as I pulled myself out of the crevasse. Half a dozen or so inside the gas station, pillaging and pilfering the remaining goods from the shelves. More worrisome was the men at the local mechanics garage next door, siphoning gasoline out of vehicles that had been left for maintenance, ill-prepared and ill-equipped to pull off the heist on the same gas station tanks that my group was about to do. Most likely desolate and demoralized, hoping to score invaluable and beneficial fuel reserves for home generators. What would they do when they saw us sucking up gallon after gallon of the cherished resource, I wondered. I radioed over to the group that was just a few hundred feet from me and told them to proceed with caution. Be ready for confrontation and don't let your guard down, I emphasized. As I entered the dark, dim interior of the store that was littered with garbage, wrappers, and toppled shelves, a group took notice of me with my face covered in battle rifle in the ready position. They promptly dropped their goods they were looting and ran for the side door exit. With the floor now wet and slippery from the snow being tracked inside, one of them went down, and while reaching hopelessly for balance, brought another down with him. The remaining individuals inside took notice of the commotion and began to scatter, as well as quickly exiting while screaming, "He's got an assault rifle!" Not wanting to be in here any longer than I needed, I immediately began searching for the backroom office in hopes of discovering the keys to unlock the tanks. With only the side-mounted light on my weapon, I navigated the back room that had plenty of backstock that had remained unscathed. Pallets of water, beer, soda, candy, chips, and other snacks. To my right was a door identified by the words manager's office written on it. I could hear another group entering the store from beyond the wall. "Who's in here and armed?" they yelled. "Give us your weapon and we'll let you live." "Talk to me, Jimmy," I said over the walkie. "Dude, you've got company in there. The people who left screaming attracted the group who were next door siphoning gas. 4 male individuals, at least 2 armed," he said. "We're coming in to try and de-escalate the situation. You get those keys yet?" "Negative," I answered. I grabbed the door handle and it was locked. With adrenaline and nerves running through my body, it took one Herculean kick to burst through the door. I could hear Jim and Michael engage the group on the other side of the thin and flimsy drywall. Michael quickly identifying himself as a sheriff's deputy, hoping to calm and diffuse the situation. "The guy in here is with us." Shocked to see his badge and finally seeing a law enforcement officer, the 4 men lowered both their weapons and their guard. Fumbling in the darkness and scanning with my light, I continued probing for the keys. Top left desk drawer, jackpot. They even labeled them for me. Fuel tank lock keys. Finally something went my way today, I thought. I emerged from the well-stocked, completely dark back room, jingling the keys on my left index finger. Michael and Jim had explained the significance and urgency to our undertaking an assignment with a group of locals. The 4 men said they were out here doing just the same as us, trying to acquire fuel to power generators and be able to provide some sort of normalcy and safety for their families. They had witnessed some pretty horrific and appalling behaviors from mankind since the lights went out. It was both utterly shocking and terrifying how quickly a civilized world turns into a barbaric one. The 8 of us decided it was best for everyone involved to work together. Grabbing the remaining shovels left from the looted and vandalized store, we began clearing the snow to reveal the location of the tanks. After 2 days of atrocities and inhumanity, the group of us working together to procure gas that would benefit so many members of our community brought some much-needed hope to this wicked world. Within just a few short minutes, we had dug out and located the tanks. Carefully propping and lifting open the tops, Jim began fidgeting through the keys, trying to remove the locks of both the diesel and regular gas tanks. Brian plugged the pump into the power inverter in his truck, and I hoped it was powerful enough to suck up the much thicker diesel fuel. In exchange for the 4 men helping, and also providing protection and lookout, we would fill up their gas cans as well. Jim had gathered 3 15-gallon plastic drums and 3 5-gallon cans, enough capacity for 60 gallons of diesel reserves per trip. With the burly screen traps removed, Jim carefully lowered the pump down the deep, dark filler pipe. Within seconds, we could hear the pump engaging and struggling to suck up the hefty diesel fuel. A 15-foot clear tube attached, feeding into the first drum, and the liquid gold began pouring in. Minutes felt like hours as the gasoline filled each drum and can, quickly pulling the tube from one receptacle to the next. It would take 2 men to lift the 110-plus pounds each drum weighed now into the back of Brian's truck. Diesel fuel acquired, we repeated the same process for our new friends, topping off their gas cans in the snowmobiles they had ridden up with to help navigate and traverse the obstructed and impenetrable snow-blocked streets. The 4 men all lived within a mile of the senior center, and in return for the fuel, had promised to check in with Michael and lend any help he needed. Brian also volunteered to relocate to the residence if it was okay with Jim and I. There's 100-plus residents. He's going to need a second set of hands, and more importantly, a second set of eyes, Brian announced. You two know my situation, and my time here is not guaranteed. Let me do the most I can while I can. He had both Jim and I's blessing. The 4 men told Michael they return each morning at daybreak to help him retrieve fuel and bring it back to the Independent Senior Living Center in return for them being able to top off their own reserves. They went their way returning home to their loved ones, and our group returned back to the Independent Living Center, unloading the treasured prize of almost 60 gallons of fuel to help keep the generators up and running additional days. Throttling back the load capacity and having additional reserves a pitching wedge away brought comfort and solace to Jim. Knowing Michael and Brian would be on site 24/7 also brought much-needed reassurance to not just him, but me as well. Well, all that's left is for Brian to give us a lift home, I uttered. No need, he said, as he tossed the keys of his truck over to me. Take it in case you guys need to get out of that complex in a hurry. You know where to come. Jim and I said our goodbyes, leaving both weapons we gathered from the 2 dead savages today. You sure, Michael asked? I'm sure, Guy. I've got plenty of firepower back home. After today, you can see this building and location is a high priority target as long as those Jennies are running. Brian's got a walkie. You need us, Channel 16, and we'll be here ASAP. 4+ hours after trekking the 1.5 miles on foot, I was finally returning home. Jim grabbed my walkie and called out to his tense, anxious, and distressed girlfriend, telling her we'd be there in 10 to 15 minutes. 30 seconds into their conversation, it was interrupted by the eerie and ominous beeps of another emergency alert broadcast transmitting over the radio. The following message is being transmitted at the request of the United States government. This is not a test. The President of the United States has issued nationwide martial law for all continental 48 states and Alaska and Hawaii, effective immediately. Attacks on law enforcement officials, United States military, and high amounts of civil unrest have been reported across the country due to the nationwide power outage. Violence in and around our nation's capital will not be tolerated. Looting and theft is inexcusable. All parties found to be in defiance are subject to being shot on the spot. Thousands of lives have already been lost, and the death toll continues rising. For your safety, you are strongly encouraged to stay indoors. Lock all doors and windows. Make sure you have essential supplies, including food and water, that will last you for your stay at home. Rationing may be required. Martial law means the citizens are prohibited from leaving their homes without proper consent from authorities. If you are away from your home, You are given the next hour to return to your residence before the military begins to take action. If you are more than an hour away from your place of residence, you will be required to get an escort from local authorities. Those caught outdoors while martial law is in effect are putting themselves in danger and will be arrested and detained immediately. Stand by for this message. This is an emergency action notification message. All broadcast stations shall transmit this message. Emergency action notification. This station has interrupted its regularly scheduled programming at the request of the United States government to participate in the emergency alert system. This is WNBC. We continue to service the Western New York area.